goal of Ukrainians was this when they came to Toronto, and that dominated, completely obliterated any other kind of Ukrainian that was in Toronto. There were a lot of communists in Toronto, a lot of communist Ukrainians in Toronto at that time. And so those are the characteristics, right? I talked about them. And this is the reason why Toronto wanted them. This is the reason why Canada accepted them. Actually, Toronto didn't want them. Canada wanted them, but they stayed in Toronto. Canada didn't like Ukrainians. Let's just face it. They didn't like them. They were the last of the barrel. They were the bottom of the white barrel, okay? In 1967, we still had an immigration law banning other types of ethnicities coming, or other types of races coming into Canada. In 1967, we had a white-only policy in Canada. We were the bottom of that, we were the bottom of the white barrel, okay? But Canada needed immigration because it needed labor, right? And they were saying, okay, fine, we'll let in the Ukrainians, but they have to be a certain type of Ukrainian. They have to be not communist because the Cold War is on. And if you have Ukrainians who are uber patriotic, ready to die for Ukraine, if the Cold War gets hotter, you've got ready trained soldiers. Boom, they're in, okay? So, when the fourth wave arrived, the Ukrainians were expecting, yes, revigoration of Ukraine. Ukraine is free. We're going to have this great community. It's going to be fantastic. They're all going to be like us. And so the Ukrainians were expecting this, in Toronto anyway. The Ukrainians are so much more than that. There's a big diversity in Ukraine. I like this compilation because you got what? You got, right? Who's that guy? Y'all know who he is. Yeah, Yanukovych. We've got bilingualism in Ukraine. Ukrainian guy with two tongues, right? Russian and Ukrainian bilingualism. We've got multi-ethnic composition in Ukraine. We've got Tatar, we've got Russians, we've got Ukrainians, we've got everything in Ukraine. We've got economic problems, military problems in Ukraine. We've got a great diversity of the fourth wave, right? So, like, you have to understand what these people are coming from, where the fourth wave is coming from. If you look at what Ukraine was in 1991, right? We knew we've all been socialized in a certain way. As third wavers, we've been socialized in a certain way. But if you look at the way the fourth wave is socialized, look at Ukraine politically, right? We know this map. This map is Yanukovych versus Yushchenko. Look at the linguistic map. It's almost identical. Okay, we've got a division. And the reason why we have the division is because we have a historical division. Ukraine was never historically unified until 1939, right? You've got Austria, Hungary, you've got Poland, and you've got Russia, USSR on the other side. United at one point, but in the sense that Russian culture in that right side of Ukraine, or actually left bank, ironically, very Russian dominated, right? You've got Russian culture dominating the high culture, which means Russian culture is high culture. It means that it's Dostoevsky, it's even Tolstoy, okay? This is the language of the arts. And then you have the dominating in popular culture. You get lots of Russian language media, right? It's dominating both pop culture and high culture. So you've got it's covering all of it, right? So that's socializing pressures, right? So, and then you look at the economy in 1991. Why did they emigrate? Why did so many people immigrate into Canada at that time? It wasn't because they thought that Ukraine was going to be great. They immigrated because of economics, right? In 1988, if you look at the statistics, 1 in 25 people was poor, right? If you look in 1996, one out of 5 people are poor. So huge jump in poverty in Ukraine. And this is actually ties into the trafficking, right? Basically the fact that nationalism was used by the same politicians that were preaching communism a couple months earlier to the independence, right? And so it's the same house of cards, right? It's the same deck. And they're using nationalism as a political tool. So nationalism was not really a go-to card for people coming to Canada. Now, if there's any questions, comments, complaints, pudding, tomatoes, we'll do it in a couple minutes, okay? Basically the fact that you have low economics means that you have low trust, right? You can't trust anybody. So that causes low social capital, which means that you can't trust your neighbor, right? And if you can't trust your neighbor, you're not going to go and hang out in a dance group with them. You're not going to go hang out and do volunteer things, especially if there's no money in the house, right? So this causes low civil society. right? Which means that civil society is defined as something that happens external to the government that is organized outside of government. So an NGO is considered a civil society organization because it's outside of governmental control. Now there's arguments that the Orange Revolution was a civil society movement, but if you look at Viktor Stepanenko, who is a sociologist in Ukraine, he kind of says, well, no, it's not civil society. It was basically just a one-time public outrage that was highly organized by NGOs. Okay, and yes, it's civil society, but not quite. But so you have these two things: low social capital and low civil society. Right? Nobody really wants to do anything volunteer. Right? So you have a heterogeneous way. You have people coming from various regions that are not united in any kind of way in terms of culture, language, views on Ukrainianism, views on nationalism. You have different historical concepts of what Ukraine looks like, right? Came independently with no cultural, this is very important, no cultural or political unification. They didn't come handpicked from DP camps. They didn't have anything really that was unifying them as a goal when they came here. And low civil society, low social capital, as we mentioned, and came from economic and political turmoil. So Ukraine wasn't the best place to be, right? So that works on pride. Now, if you look at the goals, you have goals of the third wave, goals of the fourth wave. Goals of the third wave was primarily political. Political, very political. You have the goals of the fourth wave, which are economic in nature. Maybe some political, but mostly economic, right? So the goals contrast, but are they incompatible fundamentally? Now, so what do we do? So basically, these are the discussion questions now. If they're not coming to the clubs and we're knowing what we have as terms of a problem and knowing where these people come from and where we come from and where we should all be going together, basically, do we have to change the mandate of the club, right? These pertinent questions. We have to set our mandates for next year in your clubs. Like, what are you going to do? How are you going to reconcile the two different goals? How are you going to reconcile the fact that, you know, Ivan doesn't really care about dance groups? You know, what are you going to do to interest, like, are you doing things that are interesting to them? Basically, are we actively seeking them out where they are? Are we going to the futures? Are we going to Yummy Market? Are we going to places where they hang out, right? And how are you going to approach that, right? Are you going to just kind of full frontal, or are you going to give them a chance to speak? Or are you going to, you know, how are you going to do that? Because it's going to be hard to rope in people that don't have any volunteers on, like natchnen, if you want to call it that. And also, because of the fact we have two different waves, this is the big question, this is the big dollar in your question. We have had a third wave identity in Toronto, okay, or even in Canada, I can say, for 40 years. It was the same identity. Now we have a completely different composition. Do we renegotiate the identity? Do we give a little and take a little? Or do we just completely go in two separate directions? Fourth wave has their identity, we are our identity, and we're going to live as separate communities. There is an organization called the Fourth Wave Organization, so they do have an organization, so it could go there, okay? There is a possibility that one wave could go one way, the other wave could go the other way, and never the twain shall meet. There is that potential. However, we do have very promising signs. We have more education, people are getting a little bit more educated about Ukraine, okay? People are realizing contextual things. There's a lot of intermarriage. I'm married to a Ukrainian from Ukraine, okay? Trust me, it's not easy, but there are ways to make compromises, okay? There's more intermarriage. There's also no but there's no interwaval violence to speak of, right? There's no interwaval violence to speak of, right? Nobody goes out and hits Morde because he's from the fourth wave and I'm from the third wave, okay? Like, let's be honest. Maybe it happens, but not to the degree where it's considered conflict, okay? So I'm going to pass it over to you.